Have you ever stopped to think about how we experience the world? You know, we see things, we hear things. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But what if the most important truths aren't meant to be seen at all, but heard? And what if, to really get a handle on reality, you had to somehow learn how to see a sound? Yeah, I know. Let's dive into this fascinating and honestly pretty absurd idea. So we start with this one line from the Hebrew Bible that's a real head-scratcher. It's describing the scene at Mount Sinai. But look closely. It doesn't say the people heard the sounds, it says they saw them. How on earth is that possible? Is this just some kind of poetry, or maybe even a typo? Or, and this is where it gets interesting, what if this contradiction isn't a mistake at all? What if it's a deliberate clue, left there to unlock a completely radical way of thinking about faith, about what's real, and how we perceive it? That's the puzzle we're going to try to piece together in this explainer.
Now, to even begin to solve this, we have to look at the number one rule given at Sinai. And, at first, this rule just seems to make the whole puzzle even more confusing. Right, so later on the text doubles down on the complete opposite of seeing. Moses tells the people, hey, remember that incredible moment? You saw absolutely no form, no shape, no image, nothing. There was only a voice, a sound. So now the contradiction is screaming at us. The people saw sounds, but they were specifically told they saw nothing. What is going on here?
This brings up a really big question. Why the intense focus on sound instead of sight? Why would you build an entire system of belief around the ear and not the eye? Well, the difference between these two senses is everything. Think about it. Seeing deals with stuff that's physical, concrete, finite. You see a mountain, you see a chair, it has edges, it has limits. And because it has limits, you can copy it. You can make it into an idol. But hearing? Hearing deals with the abstract. A voice, an idea. It has no physical shape. It's transcendent. It's potentially infinite. So for a God that's defined as being formless and infinite, sound is really the only medium that works.
And this is where some ancient thinkers had this brilliant insight. They translated a key phrase about that voice at Sinai, not as a sound that just ended, but as a voice that did not cease. The idea here is that this wasn't some one-and-done event. It was like a continuous, eternal broadcast of an idea, a sound wave of pure concept that is still echoing through reality, even right now.
Okay, so the foundation is sound. It's abstract, it's infinite, it's formless. I get it. But this brings us right back to square one, to our original paradox. If the main rule was no form, only a voice, then what do we do with those other verses that insist something was seen?
Because just a few chapters earlier, the text says the complete opposite. It says, you were shown to know. It uses a visual word. This isn't a mistake. It's a deliberate tension. It's practically begging us to ask, how can you possibly be shown something that has no form?
And here it is. Here's the solution to the whole riddle. The experience wasn't about physically seeing with your eyes. It's that faith itself becomes a new kind of perception. The abstract auditory idea that there is a single formless source of everything, it becomes like a pair of conceptual glasses. You put them on, and they fundamentally change how you see and interpret the entire physical world around you.
This whole transformation happens in 3 stages. First, you hear the abstract idea, that voice. Second, you chew on it, you internalize it, until it becomes a core part of your knowledge. And third, that internal knowledge completely transforms your external vision. You start to see the unity behind all the messy diversity of the world. You see the single source behind everything physical. And that's it. You're finally, in a very real sense, seeing the sounds.
But this whole synthesis of hearing and seeing, it isn't just some neat philosophical trick. It leads to a demand for a radical, all-or-nothing kind of commitment.
This all leads up to what became the central declaration of Jewish faith, the Shema Israel. And just look at how it begins. Hear, O Israel. It all starts with hearing. It's a command to listen, to really internalize this core concept of absolute, radical unity.
But really accepting this idea, truly hearing it, that's not a passive thing. If you actually start to perceive the entire world this way, as just an expression of a single infinite source, well, that belief is going to demand everything from you.
So right after the command to hear, you get the consequence. You must love this one source with every single fiber of your being. Your heart, your soul, your might, your emotions, your very life force, all of your physical stuff, everything has to be aligned with this one unifying truth that you've now perceived.
Now, this idea of total commitment was embodied in one of history's most powerful and gut-wrenching stories. The Talmud tells of Rabbi Akiva, a legendary sage. As he was being tortured to death by the Romans for his beliefs, his students saw he was reciting the Shema. They were horrified. They asked him how he could do it. But he explained that all his life he'd been waiting for this very moment, the one chance to finally prove that he could love God with all his soul.
And this leads us to a really challenging, almost absurd conclusion. In this worldview, the most profound way you can possibly affirm a non-physical reality is to willingly let go of your own physical self. For Rabbi Akiva, martyrdom wasn't a tragedy. It was the ultimate act of perception. It was the final, undeniable proof that the reality he heard was more real, more fundamental than his own physical existence.
Okay, that is an incredibly intense place to end up. But the goal isn't necessarily to seek out that kind of ending. The real question is, how do we live with this profound tension between the physical world we see and the abstract reality we're told to hear?
There's this piece of wisdom from the book of Ecclesiastes that maybe points the way. The ideal isn't to choose between the two extremes. Rejecting the physical world for the abstract or ignoring the abstract for the material stuff. The real challenge is to hold on to both at the same time. To live in the concrete world, but to see it through those glasses of that formless, unifying sound.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What if this whole paradox of seeing a sound isn't a problem to be solved, like a math equation? What if it's a dynamic tension that we're actually meant to live inside of every single day? Constantly trying to hear that invisible melody playing just behind the visible world, and in doing so, maybe transforming both.